Hey guys, it's Jay here. So welcome to 2025. I can't believe it is 2025, but it is. So new year, new day. Now today we're going to be talking about my reference system. Now if you've seen my video of the top 3 picks for 2024 in terms of speakers, you'll quickly realize that I didn't do one for gear. And the reason for that is because I simply didn't review enough gear in 2024, and I hope that changes in 2025. And I know it's going to. I'm going to be reviewing more gear in 2025 as well. But I thought instead of doing a gear award, which really doesn't make sense, I thought I would answer the most frequently asked question on my channel, which is, what do you own? Jay, what do you own? You review all this gear and speakers. What do you personally own in your reference system? And so that's what we're going to answer today. So we're going to start off with this guy. This is the Arender N20 streamer, which means that it doesn't have any DAC or preamp or anything else built into the unit. It's a solo pure streamer. Now, first and foremost, the thing that I really like about this unit is that it sounds absolutely amazing to me. First of all, when I hooked it up in my system, I found that the bass was more dynamic, things were more crisp and detailed, and the soundstage, both width and depth, improved in my system in a quite drastic way from, let's say, something like the Eversolo A6 or the A8, for example. And this is particularly important for me because personally for me, I always say that CD players sound better than streamers to this day. Even though, streamers are way more convenient, I find CD players to still sound better dollar for dollar. But of course, I value the convenience, and especially as someone that reviews gear and speakers, it's important for me to be able to play any music at any point in time right away and be able to test that in my system. And I'm not going to go into the whole ordeal of the benefits of streaming and the downfalls of streaming, but one thing that I do really appreciate in terms of just the app features and streaming, the nature of streaming, is that I find more new music on streaming. Some suggestions of title, even the Arender app is great. So for me, it's really about finding new music as well as playing existing music in my system at a fast and convenient way. And the Arender N20 lets me do that at a very high level of performance and sound quality, similar to that of CD players. Now, I do still find that higher end CD players tend to still sound better than the Arender N20, dollar for dollar, but at the same time, I don't have the convenience and the same features as I do with the Arender N20 if I just had a CD player. And talking about the features, the Arender N20, because it's a high-end streamer, has functions to turn off everything else and just concentrate on the sound quality of the unit so that the power supply is focusing just on sound quality, which is pretty overkill, but to me, it does make a small difference. But in terms of things that I don't like about the unit is also features. For example, it doesn't have EQ function or as flexible of a connection as something like the Eversolo, for example. Streamers like Eversolo DMP A6 or even the DMP A8, they offer really a lot of features like parametric EQ, DSP, just a very intensive UI and rich features packed into a very affordable streamer and DAC and a preamplifier combination. Whereas the Arender N20 is definitely a master of one instead of being a jack of all trades like the Eversolo streamers. And it does come at a very hefty price tag that's hard to justify for a lot of people. But keep in mind that the Arender N20 is second from the top, so it's definitely up there, and Arender does offer other streamers at a lesser price point. Now, I do have to quickly mention the build quality. The Arender N20 is absolutely built like a tank, and the build quality on the Eversolo units just don't come near the build quality of the Arender N20. And that goes the same for the internals of the Arender N20 as well. Inside, it's built absolutely like a tank with multiple power supplies powering each circuit board for the lowest noise floor, and it's just an absolute masterpiece. Okay, so from the Arender N20, it goes to my live DAC. This is a live harmony DAC that was introduced not that long ago, and it's been kind of my daily driving kind of DAC. And I say that a little bit reluctantly because my DAC does change out quite frequently. I like to change DACs and hear differences. And so that's kind of one of my thing is the DAC. I've never really settled on a DAC. I've had the Terminator Plus from Denafrips for a few years, but now I'm just experimenting. And so far, out of all the DACs that I've tried, I really like the Live Harmony DAC so far, just because it's compact without sacrificing much of the sound quality, and it does sound like almost a full-size unit. Now, I made a video, kind of like an initial impression video on the Live Harmony DAC and how it possibly cannot compete with bigger full-size DACs just because of the power supply and all the circuitry that needs to be there to perform better like a full-size DAC. And I have to say, I might be very wrong about that. And I said I might be in that video. And, it very much so might be. Because while I can't say for sure, and because I am going to be reviewing this DAC in the future, and so watch out for that video, I really like this DAC because mainly it's balanced. Like, I said this in my initial impression video as well, but the sound character is somewhat between the hollow audio DAC, which is very popular, and also something like the Denafrips DAC. So for me, having that middle ground that is warm and rich, but not too overboard, at the same time having the detail and nuance of something like from the Denafrips DACs, it's kind of like the best of both worlds for me. So far, I've been really loving it. Now, I did want to try it with a different streamer than the Arender N20, because the Arender N20 doesn't have I2S, which is another negative of the Arender N20. I wanted to try the I2S connection from the live DAC with a streamer that has I2S connection. And that's kind of like the other thing that I really like about this DAC, and potentially why it might be my reference DAC going in the future, because it has different pin configurations for the I2S configuration because it's not standardized, so that I can basically connect it to any streamer that comes in here and be able to test it, as long as it has I2S. So it doesn't matter if it's from PS Audio, from Denafrips, or what have you, as long as it has I2S, I would be able to configure the pinouts so that it's compatible with any unit that has I2S, which is really neat. And it's also built like a tank, and that's kind of like the going theme here. I need personally for things to be built like a tank for me to use as a reference, because I can't have it crapping out and then I can't have, a reference point at any point given, when I'm reviewing gear or speakers. So not only is this aesthetically pleasing to my eyes, but it's built like a tank. And also if you look at the internals, also you can find high quality parts like audio note parts in there, and a really quality transformer, and just overall, like just laid out, it looks beautiful. But not only that, personally speaking, it's probably one of the highest quality parts I've seen inside a DAC at this price point. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Watch the full review when it comes out. Now, you might be wondering what the heck this thing beside the Live Harmony DAC is. And this is something that is absolutely not necessary, but also at the same time necessary, if that makes sense. Let me explain in case it doesn't. So this thing is called the Analog Bridge from ModWright, and it's actually a pretty recent product that I got in. And I'm really just testing it out for just a few months, so it's not decided if it's going to be in my reference system forever. But currently, I'm thinking that it should, because there's a few things. One, this unit is made really for people that have solid-state preamplifiers, or just people that want to have a little bit of that tube characterization. So it's kind of like those tube buffers that you saw from hifi, but at a much higher level. And it actually is more than just a tube analog bridge to add tube characterization to your system. In fact, it actually is supposed to be an impedance matcher as well. And I'll go into more detail about the impedance matching thing on the actual review of this unit. But essentially, you want to have low impedance output going into a high input impedance. And so this unit allows you to do that, perhaps even better than your DAC. So for example, my Live Harmony DAC here has an output impedance of 1200 ohms with an XLR and 600 ohms with the RCA, which, to be clear, is perfectly fine, but the Analog Bridge from ModWright actually has an output impedance and converts it to 20 ohm output impedance. It also has two tube modes, so one utilizing the 6922 tubes and also the 6SN7 tubes. So I can have plenty of fun tube rolling and testing out different tubes as well if I'm reviewing tubes. And I can bypass this entire thing with a bypass switch at the back if I'm deciding to use a tube preamplifier. Now, things that I don't particularly like about this unit is that switch in the back. That bypass switch, once you get used to it, it's not a big deal. But at the same time, I feel like it'll be more useful on the front panel than it is at the back of the unit, because it is a bit, I do use it a lot to bypass it and bring it back just to compare with and without it a lot. And that becomes a little bit tedious to do, but that may be not a problem for you. And I guess another negative is the fact that you will need additional cables because you're adding another unit, which may cost you additional money. But not only that, this unit will also cost you a lot of additional money because the RCA version costs $2,900 and the XLR version that I have costs $3,900. And I know that some purists out there and some people will question why you would add something like this when you can just buy a tube preamplifier if you really wanted tubes. And we'll touch upon that in the actual review. I do actually have a good answer for that. But so far, I'm actually loving what this unit is doing in terms of sound. It's definitely bringing bass to my space, even more deeper extension and textures that I have not heard before in my system before I plugged in this unit. And that's one of the main reasons I'm considering it to keep in my main system. Also, the 6922 tubes seem to be a little bit more brighter and more neutral and kind of detailed versus the 6SN tube, SN7 tube, which absolutely kills it in the bass region. So more on that in the actual review. But so far, I'm absolutely digging this unit. Now, most of you guys that have been watching my channel will know this preamplifier. This is the preamplifier that I've been using for a while since I reviewed it. This is the ARRIC Motherload XL tube preamplifier and comes in two boxes. One's a power supply and one is the actual preamplifier. And I did make a full video on this unit, so I'll link it in the description below so you can watch the entire thing. But this unit packs a punch. It has like Jupiter caps in there. It's just a absolute masterpiece in terms of components used, care to attention to detail. Just absolutely kills it in that regard, and it sounds great. And what I really like about the sound aspect of this unit is the fact that it doesn't sound way too tubey. It's not like it's rolling off the highs and making it muddy and all gloriously silky kind of tube-like. There's definitely systems that benefit from that. But personally, I find this tube preamplifier to be fairly balanced and at the same time really, really neutral at the same time. So it has like a nice tube characterization in the mid-range, and the soundstage, my God, the soundstage. When I hooked up this preamplifier, I couldn't get rid of it because immediately the depth, the sense of 3D scale. If I don't have this hooked up in my system and I use a different solid state preamplifier, which I'll talk about in my later preamplifier reviews, I just lose that 3D lifelike soundstage. And so I just simply love the sound of this unit as well as the aesthetic. It looks quite nice. It matches with my kind of middle rack here, or stand, whatever you want to call it. Now, the thing that I don't like and what a lot of people won't like is the price point. Definitely up there in terms of price, but they do make other preamplifiers at a lesser price point. The reason I really like this preamplifier, and personally why I chose this one, is because it has XLR inputs and outputs, which is important for me because I do prefer XLR going from my DAC to my preamplifier, or from my analog bridge to my preamplifier, because I do tend to run longer lengths of cables for that. So if you don't have to run long lengths of cables like I do because you have your DAC right beside your preamplifier, then consider just trying a preamplifier they have that's less expensive that only has RCA. I've personally compared this preamplifier to things like the Sopratech Carbonet, which is a pretty highly regarded preamplifier, and it did sound really great. It actually sounded more tubey than the ARRIC 2 preamplifier that I have. But I personally preferred the more balanced nature and the fuller bass of the ARRIC rather than the more mid-centric sound of the Sopratech. And that was just my personal preference in my system. So yeah, definitely give it a try if you have never heard the RX preamplifier before. Okay, so from the RX2 preamplifier, I'm running it into my audio and monoblocks, of course, from AGD, which has been absolutely my favorite since 2 years ago. Absolutely fell in love with them. And I know some people are like, oh, it's gimmicky because it uses tubes. But I think people are kind of missing the point there. They're not trying to fool anyone into thinking that this is a tube amplifier, but more so that tube is just an aesthetic thing. As well, it actually performs as a modular unit. It functions as a modular unit, so you can switch it out to a different module by just changing to a different tube that AGD offers in the future for future upgrades. And you've seen this with the introduction of the Mark III tubes that the users of the Mark II could upgrade to for more power output and just improved circuitry for better performance. And you will notice that this one is kind of like a special finish with like copper accents, and that was specifically requested by me to AGD, and they were kind enough to do a kind of like a one-off version. I'm not sure if they'll do it for you, but if you really like this finish, then consider reaching out to them and talking to them about it. But personally, I really dig it. And because this is an amplifier that I knew I was gonna keep for a long time, after a year, I was like, yeah, I want something that is a little bit unique, something that I can keep and love for a long period of time. And so I came up with this kind of copper accented design idea, and AGD was able to thankfully do it. So very happy about that. By the way, this type of finish is really hard to do because copper tends to tarnish and you have to do a special coating. And you can see that even the screws here has some special coating because it's copper coated. And I made a full video about this unit, so I'll link in the description below. But this unit is just absolutely stunning. It just performs very neutral with a very refined high, and it just brings music into my room. And it's very dynamic despite the size. It's a Class D amplifier with the leading technology of GONFET, and I've compared a lot of GONFET designs now that I've tried more, and I'll be continuing to search for something a little bit less expensive that performs similarly. But so far, even something like the Orchard Audio Star Crimson that I reviewed didn't sound alike the AGD, even though they're both GONFET-based designs. And don't get me wrong, the Star Crimson was an absolutely stunningly high-performance amplifier for the money, especially if you DIY yourself. But this, AGD still did it for me. And after hearing the Star Crimson, that's when I paid AGD, and I was like, I want this amplifier. Take my money. So that's how I ended up with the AGD as my reference unit. Now I'm currently testing out a different amplifier that also has a GONFET technology, but it's only the power supply, and that's the Burson's new flagship monoblocks. And these were just absolutely blow my mind kind of performance. And I'll definitely say right off the bat, it doesn't sound like the AGD, but it has its own thing going for it that I personally value a lot. So I do switch occasionally back and forth from the AGD to the Burson. Now I'm not decided yet if I'm going to keep the Burson as one of my reference amplifiers. So far, the AGD is the only for sure reference unit that I have ever since I sold my NAT transmitter monoblocks, which I also loved. But that thing was way too big and was providing way too much heat, which by the way, I do regret getting rid of that amplifier. That monoblock was absolutely state-of-the-art, best tube amplifier I have ever heard with the right preamplifier. And that was the really key. It was finicky with the preamplifier matching, and so that was one of the reasons I had to get rid of it, because when I'm reviewing preamplifiers and other things that come in here, it's like 90% of it NAT did not like. NAT likes what it likes, and when it does, it will give you bliss. But when it doesn't like it, it just won't. And so that was one of the reasons. But now that I think about it, I really do regret selling that unit. But coming back to the Bursons, yeah, these units surprisingly has qualities that I really liked about the NAT. For example, it has a really wide and really deep soundstage and really airy kind of presentation that even the AGDs don't quite have. It's a little bit more fatiguing and more sensitive to gear matching than the AGD audience, but so far with the 2 preamplifier like Eric, bliss, just absolute bliss. And so I'm definitely considering this unit as my reference going in the future. And I think you'll find out very soon on what I decide about the Burson, whether it'll be a reference or not. But right now I'm like 90% convinced that it will be my new reference, one of my new reference alongside the AGD. The only thing that I don't quite like about it right off the bat is the fact that it comes with 2 separate GON-fed power supplies, which again, both the power supply and the actual units, the actual amplifiers, really high build quality expected of Burson. Do like Australians just throw this like kangaroos or something? Because my God, they're built like tanks. But that also comes with a downside, and the obvious downside is that you will need the rack space, and it does add extra cables that go from the power supply to the amplifier itself. And it just a little bit sometimes, as you can see here, it gets a little bit messy if you don't have the space. And so that's one of the things that I don't quite like about it. But it sure beats having like a separate kind of brick, ugly, black power supply hanging out of it. So I have mixed feelings about it. I'll see how it goes while I'm using it, and I'll report to you guys on the final findings and what I feel about it, any workaround and so on in the future video. But so far, the sound itself, absolutely considering it, and that little 10% is more about the actual use case scenario and how convenient it would be for me to swap in and out. Now lastly, we have to talk about speakers. Now I know I did a full video on my top 3 pick for 2024, but a certain speaker that I kind of mentioned in that video towards the end that I'm currently rocking for the last few months and really digging into it, and I will have that review out shortly, is the Orendo 1528 bookshelf loudspeakers. These are absolute beasts. And I reviewed the tower version, which was way too big for my room, but this fits in perfectly. This bookshelf is perfect for my room. And the bass, the soundstage, the depth, the details, the nuance, the balance, it's an absolutely astonishing loudspeaker. And I'll definitely be comparing to my current reference of the Platimon speakers from Acoustic. But also, I asked you guys on the community post poll on which speakers you want me to compare the Orendo 1528 bookshelf speakers to. And a lot of you actually picked the KEF R3 Meta loudspeakers, which understandable because that speaker got great reviews, and it's kind of odd, but I have not reviewed it yet. I've been requesting it for almost a year, and they finally said they were gonna send it to me. So once it's in, I'll do a fair comparison, I'll do the measurements and do a subjective analysis and give you guys, all my opinions as well as the objective data. So keep an eye out for that. But the 1528 bookshelf speakers, once again, I've been running it for a few months and it's been absolutely smashing it. Just incredible dynamics, incredible detail, soundstage, and actually not over the top with the detail. It is detailed, but not bright, if you know what I mean. It's like very silky on the top end, even more so than the 1528 towers did. So anyways, I'll go into more detail in the review itself. Now, of course, on my top rack, I have my analog stuff like the turntable, Technics, reel to reel, and the Alnic phono stage. And I actually already did a video on my referenced analog setup because that was an entire video that I did. So I'll link to that in the description below so you can check that video out after this video. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I wish all the best for you guys in 2025. Hope to see you guys more. And make sure to subscribe and like this video if it was helpful. That's pretty much it. Until next time. Peace.